Okay, dokes, I think we can get started. We are really excited for this session, which is co-hosted by Pan-Africanism Today and Tricontinental Institute for Social Research, which is titled Political Education for Liberation. Sorry, I was getting a voice note there. Political Education for Liberation, Learning from the PAIGC. In this session, we will discuss a recently published study produced by Sonia Vasborges, who's joining us, in collaboration with Tricontinental. And in this study, it explores how the African Party for Independence of Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde, the PAIGC, how they constructed a new education system during the height of the struggle for national liberation. And it'll try to reflect on what it meant then, what it means for contemporary processes that are trying to construct political education for projects and processes amongst the left and progressive movements. We are joining everyone, and you are joining us, on an auspicious day in terms of a key anniversary in West African history and African history, which was the Pinji massacre that happened on the 3rd of August, 1959. On this date, we had over 500 dock workers who embarked on a strike that would basically alter the course of history in Guinea-Bissau and deepen the struggle for national liberation. What happened on the day was that, as is the case in many African countries, many countries that were being colonized in the global south, workers were being paid, pittance of wages, were under very poor conditions, had no working rights, let alone human rights. And so these workers, these dock workers, at one of the central ports in Guinea-Bissau, gathered to demand that they get an increase in wages and, of course, in a better standard of working and living. But of course, as was the case in many other parts of the continent, the police were called in, the military was called in, guns and grenades were used, and the colonial forces basically repressed this strike. And we saw at least 50 workers who were murdered during the process. This was a turning point for the PAIGC in terms of their strategy, as they saw there was no way to peacefully negotiate with the Portuguese colonizers and their different armed forces of repression. From this point on, they recognized the need to re-strategize, to embark on an armed struggle, a protracted struggle. But at the same time, whilst they were trying to regain and liberate their territories, they were also constructing new forms and processes of social development. And a keystone of that was education. So our first speaker, who will give us an input of around 20 minutes, is Sonia Vasborges. She's a militant interdisciplinary historian and a longtime social and political organizer. The study we published drew from one of the chapters of her 2019 book, Militant Education, Liberation, Struggle, and Consciousness, the PAIGC's education in Guinea-Bissau from 1963 to 1978. So over to you, Sonia.
Thank you, Michaela, for the kind introduction. Greetings to everyone joining us today from different parts of the world and from different living rooms to participate in this discussion. Thank you for the Tricontinental Institute for inviting me to produce this work as your first number of the studies on national liberation. Thank you for the wonderful group of people who joined and supported me and closely work with me to produce this wonderful work, like Vijay Prashad, Michaela Erskog, Selena de la Crosse, Things Chak, Suzanne Gilbert, and many others. And many thanks also to the translators of the Tricontinental team, who by their wonderful work made now this work accessible in other languages like Portuguese and Spanish. And hopefully one day there will be a translation to Cape Verdean Creole and Ghanaian Creole and many other languages, so we can all have access to this practice of the PAIGC. Thank you, Supazi and Blaise, for joining me in this discussion and presentation. And to start, I would like to say, like Michaela mentioned, this is a long process. It came from a PhD. It started with a PhD process and then became a book in 2019. And now we have a more shorter version in this collection, in this series of the national liberation. And normally we add more pages to our work by including all the other materials that it was not able to be part of the book. So we have this pile of work that we collect during the research, and then we put it on the box, and then we just select some that goes to the book, and then there is the leftovers that we wish we could put, but we don't have the space. In this case, we go on the opposite way. Instead of adding more, we are summarizing it. And summarizing, I don't know how, almost 100 pages is not an easy task. Actually, is quite challenging. And it's a process that it goes full of many feelings and emotions, including this one, and I quote myself during the process of doing, and quoting my own thoughts that sometimes cross my head, that I quit, I don't want to do it anymore. But that is just a way of me venting from time to time to release the stress in order to continue the work, because I face it as a process of learning from what was written, learning to transform words in the same words, but in a more reduced setting, and continue the work. So the work that Micaela already presents, the PAIGC Political Education for Liberation Guinea-Bissau from 1963 to 1974, it goes a little bit shorter than the actual book that ends in 78, is divided in, let's call, nine parts. The first part is a PAIGC struggle for liberation, where I mentioned the places the PAIGC in the long tradition of resistance of Guinea-Bissau, Cape Verde, and in Portugal, in a way that is not seen as an isolated case, and the massacre of Pinji is also part of this process. And then the second part, whose title is the PAIGC Education Project. And here I focus more on the organization of the party and the resolutions that were taken out of the Casaca Congress that happened in 1964. And one of the biggest resolutions were to create schools. The third part the first part of this study focused on the PAIGC schools in the liberated areas. And here we have how the PAIGC start to create the schools in the so-called liberated areas, which means areas where the Portuguese didn't have so easy access to them. And here we have like the Tabanca schools, like the village schools, the translation of Tabanca. And the PAIGC will also create the internatos, which means the boarding schools, and it created in different parts of the country or the territory of Guinea-Bissau in the north, in the south, and in the east. And then we have the two main schools of the PAIGC, the Escola Piloto, located in Guinea-Conakry, which was the pilot school where the education process were being developed and then transferred to the boarding schools or to village schools. But it was a process that goes back and forth. It's not just developed. It was not just developed in the pilot school, but it was also developed in the schools in the forest, in the liberated zones, and then reports were sent to Escola Piloto in order to see what was being created or what was being done. And there's the other school, Escola de Teranga, which was located in Senegal, in Ziguinchor, which was a later school. But also in this chapter, we talk about the other facilities that the PAIGC created for adults. Let's say how they use how they create a center for the military to not just to learn how the practice of the struggle in terms of armed struggle, but also to learn from the practice of doing the political education in the same center. And we have also the center that was created for the teachers. How do you work with the teachers under these conditions, what kind of materials that the teachers produce under this condition. And it's actually in this Center for Recycling or of teachers that some of these practices were being put in practice. In this way, decolonization happens in the two forms, just the practice of looking at the materials that are going to be taught at school and looking at the materials that they themselves study. So in this process of doing this, they are looking at two materials and seeing a way through creating a decolonizing practice to put it in the schools. The fourth chapter is the militant approach to education, and it's explained the use of the term militant and how it and what that entails, and to give way to the concept of militant education as a committed and engaged and conscious anti-colonial education process focused on an expansive concept of liberation. And this opens way to three other chapters, meaning the militant teacher, the militant combatant, and the student, which PAIGC was creating this path of education or this concept of education for each of the group, but not meaning that they were separated, but they were interconnected, how this practice was being done. The other chapter, the number 8, means on transforming pedagogical materials and curricula, and this opens way to two different paths. One, the curricula for the children and for the youth, and another chapter on curricula for adult political education. And here we have a more clear view of how the teachers who were working very close together on creating this curriculum, how they put it in practice in terms of the content of this curriculum, the materials that they produce, like the school manuals. PAIGC produced it during this time, 4 school manuals from the 1st to 4th grade, and in collaboration to other movements, it was also developed a math textbook for from the 1st to the 4th grade. But also during this process, there were many other materials that was produced. Let's say we can use the publication of Jornal the Blufo newspaper, which was a youth newspaper that was used also to teach adults how to read and to write, because it circulated and it was easy and it was joyful to read and explore. So it was used as a way to teach how to read and to write, and with immense political content also in there. There was the Jornal Libertação, Liberation newspaper, which was more directed to the adults, was also produced under these circumstances. And these lessons that were being explored in the school manuals, you have a variety of lessons that students could use and teachers could also use in order to decolonize the thought, decolonize the practices of learning, and also to understand the circumstances where the struggle was happening. Let's say talk about Cape Verde, talk about Guinea-Bissau, and talking also about the conditions of the struggle, and thinking about the future of the struggle after independence was achieved. And to close, there is the chapter Education, Revolution, and Resistance, where there is a small summary of all these practices of PAIGC. And the study is complemented with many images from Joel Coutinho, which one can find on internet. And I would like to highlight the image of the PAIGC militants, combatants using their resting time to learn, to study, where you have them seated there reading a book, and at the same time you have all these combatant materials at drying on top of a branch, which I find it very interesting to see during the happening in terms of pictures during that time. And there's also the picture of the boarding school in Sara, where you see a mother breastfeeding and at the same time in the school setting, learning how to read and to write. And on the table, there is this math textbook, which was actually produced for Frelimo in Mozambique, but also circulated by in Guinea-Bissau by the PAIGC and in Angola by the MPLA. And this actually was the process of choosing the pictures was a process of learning for me, because I had all this database of material where I could find my materials, but I totally had no knowledge about the photos of Joel Coutinho being online and that one could use. So writing this study was also a process of learning for me. Learning in terms of what are the sources can one use, and the images that one can see in the book, they are part of this second learning in terms of the book. And I don't want to disclose much more of what is inside, and I think my colleagues are going to mention some other aspects, but I would like to close by thanking everyone who participate, and hoping that many other people will read and also to receive the feedback. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sonia. Next, we will have Anele Sopazi, who's a member of Pan-Africanism Today's Secretariat, which is part of the Sub-Saharan region, the Sub-Sahara Regional Coordination Body of the International People's Assembly, which is a network of international movements from trade unions to political parties to social justice groups who are trying to work together to build a collective political platform for collective struggle, collective campaigns, and collective awareness around working class issues. He's also a member of the Nkrumah School Collective, which is a popular education school in South Africa. Over to you, Anele.
Thank you so much, Comrade Nika, and good evening, everyone. Good day, wherever you are in the world, and also good evening to my fellow panelists in this session today. And one must start with first appreciating the text that has been written together with Sonia, which has been a mirror to those of us who are popular educators who are interested in trying to find solutions that the masses are concerned with. And this text placed a mirror right into our faces to reflect on the practicality and also the impact of the many projects of education and programs that we have been part of. So this has been truly a resource for us to reflect and to think more seriously about the question of education for liberation, considering that we have entered the second phase of the African liberation struggle to free ourselves from the clashes and the dungeons of colonialism, neo-colonialism, capitalism, and imperialism. And also would like to thank the team at Tricontinental for having to convene this session to ensure that we talk and continuously evaluate our processes of education. And in the book itself, one finds a lot of practical tools that they can use. And us at Pan Africa Today have been inspired by this session, and we took this text to be a central text that should be part of our education processes. So in future projects, this is going to be a material that is going to come in handy for the many various programs that we run. But one must speak to the simplicity of the text and the fact that it makes it very clear and practical the kind of praxis and conditions that the PAIGC led its education program. And one starts with understanding the need that as popular educators, we are given the responsibility to simplify the readings, the political theories in the most accessible language and bringing them into context of the audience. And that is something that we should always grapple with as popular educators, to speak to people, to educate the people where they are and focusing on their material conditions, because central to the text and what it brings forth is that the education needs to respond to the material conditions that the people are faced with. It should not be an education that merely gives people the ability just to read and write, but also to respond to their material conditions, to be part of reconstructing a new reality for them, especially for the downtrodden masses who are exploited and oppressed by the ongoing system of capitalism. So it is important as educators in our education process to draw the people to the great processes of our time and making them understand the need that through education, we can have the tools, the methodologies, the tactics, and the strategies to reconstruct the world and change the material conditions. And the other thing that we think the approach of the book, which takes a very radical stance in saying that the education was not in the sense of gaining political liberation or flag independence only, but to reconstruct completely the world as we see it today to be an envisioned world where there is equity and there is justice for the masses who are exploited. And this demonstrated the impact that the education had, seeing that from when the PAIGC started its education project, there were fewer schools that were in the country, but through their process of building many education programs, they were able to ensure that the population, the citizens in Guinea-Bissau are educated and are illiterate, because schools had been placed in only for those who are assimilated to the culture of the colonialists. And this is the trend and what we have studied in history to be the whole point of colonial education, that it seeks to assimilate people into the culture of the colonizer and to rip people away from their culture. But the radical stance of this militant approach to education ensures that it restores people dignity, that it restores their sense of self, restores their culture, and restores their heritage, and makes them to be full human beings that live in a world that are in touch with all the senses and all the different sides of the life that we're in. And for us, it also made us think about the project that we had started in 2021 to take education into the sites of struggles, into where the masses are organizing and mobilizing, as it's one of the most important things, moving away from the centralized space. As Comrade Mika has mentioned, that we'd be running our programs within South Africa in the space that we are in now. And we had seen that there was a need for us to take this beyond the space and decentralize education, to take it to the sites of struggles so that it feeds and infuses and integrates to the larger and bigger picture of the second phase of the African liberation struggle, which is to overthrow imperialism and capitalism in Africa. And we have seen that in making things practical, in being grounded in the experiences of the masses, entrenching ourselves in the struggles of the masses, is what would make us the militant teacher, is what would make us the militant student. It is only through integrating and entrenching ourselves in the struggles of the people, grounding our experiences, grounding our work exactly in those experiences, and not be speaking from afar from the people, but speaking with the people to find solutions to the things that challenge us now today. And another thing that we have found to be useful and found to be most important is the approach that the schools had a Pan-African character to them as well, because one was built in Conakry and in other various spaces to lead education for the Guinea-Bissau liberation, is that it had a Pan-African character. It understood that beyond the struggle for independence from colonial domination, is that we need to go further than that and integrate the whole continent to be one and to unify our efforts as African people as we try to reclaim our dignity and to reclaim our land. And I think that in there itself inspires us more to further and work more creatively in taking education to the sites of struggles to ensure that our people socialize and integrate with different kinds of cultures and different kinds of audiences, to ensure that as we continue in our projects, we build a Pan-African identity of revolutionaries and activists that wants to reconstruct the world that we're living in now today. And that we see as the basis and the foundation of it has to be popular education that will respond to the material conditions of the people. And to us, the question of a grounded popular educator is a central issue that we think is the most important. And in order for us to ensure there is impact in the education that we do, it cannot be done in silos. It has to be done in collective revolutionary spirits. And it also has to be done alongside struggling with the masses of our people. And the other thing that we think is important is not only through teaching to stand in front of people, but teaching through emulation, to embody values and traditions and cultures that emancipate people as educators, and not to speak this way and act this way, but to be in line with our thinking, with our speaking, and with our action. One of the most things that were found to be really remarkable in the most education programs around is that people most of the time will cling on to how we acted in specific situations. And we will see that through those situations where we acted correctly and applied ourselves in a correct manner, the people were able to emulate the same values and the same traditions and cultures that we seek to ensure that we socialize with them through the education that we make it available for them. And the other thing that we think is important is that it's this focus on the question of young people. And it's pushing us to a point where now we need to think more creatively around how can we bring younger people into these spaces of education, how we can work with them to ensure that at an early age, we start this education process with them, because we know that in the mainstream education, that there is a banking system, which is a term developed by Paulo Freire, that we use most of these methods when we deliver popular education. And we need to draw young people to an education that is emancipatory and that is liberating. And we at Pan-Africa today, we have learned quite a lot, and this has posed to us some questions that we need to start thinking through, that the decentralized education spaces become the spaces to conscientize our masses, and the center where we run popular education courses to be a space that build cadres so that we're able to strengthen the struggles of the masses in the continent. So with that intervention, Comrade Mika, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Anela. I think with that, we can go over to Blaise. Blaise is currently the convener of the Accra Collective of the Socialist Movement of Ghana, which is an organization committed to the struggles of the working class in Ghana and beyond. He's also a member of the Cabral Popular Education School, which is based in Ghana. Over to you, Blaise. You need to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Mika. Thank you very much, all of you. It's a great privilege to be part of this discussion around popular education for national liberation. I think it is important to note that the national liberation struggle of the people of Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde is an important inspiration for all of us who are engaged in struggle. The level of dexterity, the level of anger and atrocity that our people are facing has caused all of us to continuously reflect on the important elements that political education brings. And that experience of the people of Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde is an important, turning point. I must also admit that this is the first time that I have come into contact with an analysis about the political education program of the PAIGC. If you read the text, it's very detailed on how political education was essential for struggle. All we have known is about the agitation, the sufferings of the people, the material realities that caused Cabral, to revolt and to form the guerrilla movement that eventually defeated Portuguese colonialism. We have also known that political education was key, but the level at which this document reveals the context and the extent to which they organize themselves is amazing. And I think it's an important turning point for all of us who are engaged in political education. I must also mention that when I read the text, one thing that was clear for me is the method. And I think that we must always go back to the method. It was clear that historical and dialectical materialism was important in analyzing the context for which reason political education was key. Because we must always understand which moment we are and to fashion our political education that connects with the method. For example, you hear so many people say it's time to launch a guerrilla warfare. But what analysis have you made? What is the context? So I thought that when you read the text and the context with which the people of Guinea-Bissau, led by Amilcar Cabral, they understood the concrete living conditions of the people. And when I read the text, it was clear at a point when they were saying that it is not important to let people understand what colonialism does. It is important to ask the relevant and simple questions. What have you eaten today? When was the last time your mother had medical care? Do you have access to medical care? Is there food for your family? What are the living conditions of your people? So this understanding would allow you to fashion a political education program that connects directly with the people, so that then we are not engaged with this hard level theoretical, debates that is disconnected with the reality of the people. And I thought that also even Anneli drew our attention to that. And if you read the text, one of the most important analyses that they made, that it was clear to overthrow bourgeois institutions of exploitation and oppression, and that it was time to create a project of national reconstruction that pursues an economic, social, and political program that affected the needs of working class people. So we must also use our method to make an analysis and be clear what political program we are fashioning that connects directly with the concrete reality of our people. The other aspect of the text that I was so much fascinated about is the different levels of political education. And Anneli also mentioned it. Most of the times you bring people different levels into the same classroom. You are talking about class struggle. You are talking about how capitalism affects us. But capitalism exploits us differently. Capitalism exploits men and women differently. Capitalism exploits children differently, the youth. So how do you fashion a political education program that addresses these different levels? So I thought that was also another important aspect of this document that we today should pay attention to. At that time, what was the context? They were fighting for national liberation. Today, we have gone a little further beyond national liberation. We are not engaged in global capitalist exploitation and oppression. So how does our political education address this global need? And for us at the Amilcar Cabral School, we have tried to arrange our political education to see how we can address these different levels of our time. We have what we call the mini schools, where we go into the community and then, we engage with the community and organize fashion out some political education that will immediately connect with those communities that we address. So if we go to the campuses, we know how we fashion our education that addresses the student needs. If you go to a community, you organize a mini school that addresses the issues of the community. Then we have the national schools that deals concretely with our organization, how we build our cadres. Okay, so you are bringing the collectives, and it is the mini schools, some of the mini schools that culminates into collectives. So you are bringing leaders of the collectives for political education. You are bringing members of the collective for political education. Then we have the regional level, which addresses the West African sub-region, movements, political parties that are engaged in some form of struggle. So that is another level of political education. Then we have the international, which goes beyond the regional level. So when I read the text that talked about the different levels of political education, what struck me is that even beyond these levels, how do we also fashion our political education program that addresses some of the concrete issues of the different levels of our cadres? Because even the cadres, there are different levels. And so, I mean, that tells us that it is a very tedious task. It's not a task that we cannot do, but documents and texts like this would allow us to fashion ourselves and fashion our processes that addresses these different needs. The use of media was key. Media has become a platform that is dominated by bourgeois propaganda. Perhaps at the time of Amilcar Cabral, at the time of the formation of the PAIGC, maybe this was not a concrete issue. Now it is a concrete issue. So it means we have to start thinking about media as a very important instrument of struggle. How do we form TV stations, newspapers, radio, that serves as alternative propaganda tools to address the imminent issues that are coming up. So I thought that these were some of the most important items that I took from the text that I should mention. But if you permit me, I want to say that when I read the text, there's a challenge that we face here that I did not particularly see in the text. I don't know whether Sonia can draw some, can give me some insight. It's an issue of language. You go into a community and we are all addressing these schools in English language. At the community levels, language has become a very big barrier. Even at the Amilcar Cabral School, cadres come with different levels of comprehension. How do we have to translate all these texts into different languages, or do we find one language that connects with working class people? I think the issue of language is a very big issue that is coming up as a major challenge for us. And if Sonia can throw some light on it, I will be very grateful. Thank you very much, Mika. Thank you very much. I think I'm done.
Thank you so much, Blaise, and thank you for posing a question. So we have about 20 minutes, and I think we can start off with that question. But before we do that, I wanted to actually share the images that Sonia had mentioned as part of the study, just because this isn't visuals that a lot of us, some of us who've been, growing up in Southern Africa, don't have access to these, even though they're part of the commons. And this was one of the images that she spoke of, as well as, if you permit me, I know this is not the most professional, is I thought this is an iconic image of me as a feminist who works around feminist issues, of how do you bring women into educational processes if they're not supported in terms of childcare needs and the various other historically gendered labor roles that we are forced to take. So some of these visuals also created, I think, very impactful understandings of the multiple ways we need to address education. So I don't know if, Sonia, you want to maybe address Blaise's question in relation to, because as you mentioned, they had schools in Senegal, that's a different language group in terms of a Francophone country, as well as how it related the processes of popular education and mobilization, given that they would have been indigenous languages, creoles of various kinds.
Okay, thank you very much all for the comments on the readings and the different path that it takes you all, or different thoughts that came to your mind. And the question of language is a question that I received a lot because the PAIGC documents are all written in Portuguese. but the language that they communicated within themselves the most was Creole. And having in consideration that Guinea-Bissau had a variety of many other languages, from Pula, from Manjaco, and so on. So the strategy of the PAIGC, and Cabral is very clear on that, is to say that the language was used was an instrument, and the Portuguese in this context was under the Portuguese colonial education. The Portuguese were the first language, and the language in the country, the language that was written on the documents, of the colonial documents, they were also in Portuguese. So language, the Portuguese language was used as an instrument, and also a way to create a kind of a common language beyond, apart from the Creole language that was also not spoken by everyone, especially the children who were polyglots and had many other languages. Creole was not really part of their daily life. And in this way, what the PAIGC had done was to use the Portuguese as the common language, the language that would connect them all in a very pragmatic way, and also to think about the future of the state, the construction of the state after independence, but allowing also all the languages to be included in the school. Let's think, for example, that you have a student who speaks Fula, another student who speaks Manjaco, another student who speaks Creole. So what the interesting thing from the interviews is that seeing how the students, they become translators inside the class for each other, for other students of the same language. So this dynamic allowed it to incorporate all the languages in the school curriculum. By using one as the learning language, or the pragmatic language that would then be used in the future after the country became independent in the construction of the state. So the PAIGC created was very clear on seeing the value of each language for the construction of the state, using the Portuguese as a pragmatic one for the moment of the armed struggle, but thinking also of the Creole becoming the national language after independence, and after becoming more clear how to teach in Creole, how to put this program to put the Creole as a practical part of the program, but validating all the other languages in the classroom. And Guinea-Conakry and Senegal, they are French-speaking countries, but in these schools, they were mostly Portuguese-speaking professors or teachers teaching there. But that does not mean that the French was not being incorporated also in the school. They also had the students also had to communicate with the outside world, especially if they were in Senegal. Then French became also part of their daily language or learning language also in the classroom. And also we have to think that also these students, they had to travel abroad to other countries, let's say Germany and all the Solidarity or Cuba. So they had all this. They also had to be open or to be faced with other languages. So when you talk about the question of language on the PAIGC, it was more of an instrument than an instrument to build the state, an instrument to create this common ground in a way that they could communicate, but not invalidating all the other languages, but bringing actually them to the classroom.
Thanks, Sonia. And Anila, I don't know if you have any commentary on the language question, because I know we face it in the Nkrumah School and in South Africa, which has 11 official languages.
Yes, Comrade Mika. We had to deal with this, especially once we were plunged into the pandemic and traveling was more difficult to bring people into our spaces. And we had to ask ourselves the question, how do we continue with education in a time where there are limitations in our ability to move around? And this is where our approach of decentralized education came from, to take education to the sites of struggles of our masses. But the pilot project of that had to happen within the South African context. And we began that in 2021, where we did a study on the Communist Manifesto, but this Communist Manifesto that we use was translated from English into isiZulu. So we were able, therefore, to take that material in isiZulu and engage various organizations within South Africa to study the Communist Manifesto in isiZulu, and also have discussions and sessions where we explore the themes and discussions that are raised within the Communist Manifesto in isiZulu. And this has been a very profound experience for us, because now people who could not understand when they were in our space, because in our space we run these programs with English and have French and Portuguese translation when we have international guests. But for local guests, we would only have the English language as the mode of teaching and learning. But in the sites of struggles themselves, we took a different route and say, we will use isiZulu as the language of teaching and learning. And that is translated to people being able to understand their struggles and understand the great processes of our time that they're involved in. And what that meant is that they were able to be trained to understand the Communist Manifesto, to apply in their context what that text means for them. And therefore, in a later stage, they were able to transfer that knowledge back to the organizations and other people who were at a foundational level of learning. So we saw that having this text translated into the native languages of the nation states that we're in is one of the ways that we can start answering the question of language in our education processes. So that experience had taught us a lot, and we're able to expand it further into Lesotho, where our comrades would run education programs in isiSotho, so that the understanding of the people can be in line with the objectives that we're trying to achieve, so that we don't come to them and speak to them in a language that would ensure that they still have limitations in understanding, but to use their local languages, from the text that we use to the language that we use for teaching and learning. And that experience has proven truly that the people thereafter are able to apply the theory that they learn in their context, and they're able to socialize the knowledge that they are getting with other people. So we thought that is something that would be important to share also, as our approach has taken a very creative outlook in terms of dealing with the question of language. But we still get to be challenged with this when we are in our central space. As Comrade Blaze had mentioned, that people will come with varying degrees of understanding and knowledge. But we still try to make it a point that in the schools themselves, people are allowed to express themselves in their language. And if there's a fellow comrade who understands the language, would therefore provide translation in the classroom, just to ensure that everyone is able to participate and they're able to share their views with the rest of the collective. So those are some of the two methods that we have used in trying to address this question of language, because we must understand that doing this work we're doing it with limited resources. So anytime that we have people in our spaces, we have to make sure that we use it effectively and efficiently. So that has really helped us in ensuring that people don't leave our space feeling that they had not learned anything, or we don't leave people's spaces feeling that we came there to just speak above them and not with them.
Sure. Thanks, Sanile. We have about like 10 minutes, and I'm sure we can go a little over time, but we have 3 questions that I've gotten. And what I think we can do is, let me share the 3 questions. And then Sonia, if you want to address all 3 or 2 or 1, please do so. And then if Anele and Blaze have any kind of commentary, please feel free to do so. But I would like to prioritize the study itself, and some of the questions are directed at the content. So one question is that, Today, we have the most difficult question: what takes priority between teaching people to read and write in terms of literacy versus political consciousness projects? Is it possible to do them simultaneously? And how did the PAIGC deal with this? Did they prioritize literacy over political education, or how did they approach this? So that's one question. The second question is that, so of course, different groups were tackled in terms of youth, children, adults, in terms of political education. And the question is around, was it more about producing content and materials that address those specific groups, or was there a focus on different methodologies? So in terms of materials, was there a priority that older people might be more inclined to read newspapers versus youth might be more attracted to visuals and things like that? And I think they're asking this question because they're trying to think about, in today's contemporary world, we often have to use social media and these different formats. So at the time, what was the weight between the type of content produced for those different groups and the methodologies behind it? And the last question, which is a broader question, is how can popular and revolutionary movements in the context of contemporary neoliberal capitalism set up a militant education approach, or an approach to education that is militant, in the way that the PAIGC did, given that it was a different context and the situation has shifted? So I think the question is around the relevance of a militant approach to education in the contemporary. So if that's okay with you all, Sonia, you can go ahead. You're still muted, I think.
Wait, okay. Thank you for the questions. I'll try to answer in the limits of my capacities to the three of them. And I'll start with the first, teaching people to read and write or to start with political education. I don't think this is a process that goes dissociated from. I think you can teach both at the same time, and actually PAIGC taught both at the same time. To give an example, is when they start this process of militant education, teaching how to read and write, they didn't have their books yet produced, so they had to use Portuguese colonial books. And in order to teach these Portuguese colonial books, they use it for the process of learning how to read and write. But at the same time, this process of learning how to read and write was used, or the way that the lessons were taught was also to construct the ideas, the colonial ideas, in these school manuals. In this way, political education and the teaching how to read and write, they go hand in hand. And this was a practice that many of the teachers that I interview in Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde, they use it in their classrooms. And this was not just for a group of youth, but also for the group of adults and combatants. So it was very hand-to-hand in the way that they use this political education as a way of learning how to read and write, and learning how to read and write through political education. So I don't think these are dissociated, and I don't think there is a priority here. I think both, at least from the practice of the PAIGC, were and can be taught at the same time. Answering to the second question, producing content of material or methodologies. I can give another example of the way that the PAIGC produced the school newspaper or the youth newspaper, o Blufu, which was a magazine produced in Escola Piloto for the students, and that the goal was to make it accessible to other schools in the liberated zones in Guinea-Bissau. The thing is that to transfer this magazine, combatants had to travel to the schools and deliver them. So in this process of traveling with the school with this magazine, they also used the occasion to read So somehow a methodology that was used for the youngsters was somehow appropriated by the adults in the process of learning how to read and write, but also to be aware of what was happening in the struggle, at least in the part of in the way that it was being transmitted to the youth. Like, what are the travels that were being done? What are the visitors that are coming to us? What other countries are also in the process of liberation struggle? What is the solidarities that we have, let's say, with the people from the GDR in Germany? How is a student who went to Cuba? What are the struggles of the Cuban people? Or what are the Cuban doctors that are at this moment in Guinea-Bissau in the forest operating or are visiting the pilot school? So in this way, is the Bluefield serves as an example of something that was created for youngsters, and at the same time was appropriated by adults in this process of using the materials that were available. And this we can see throughout many other materials that the PAIGC had produced. Let's think also about how the radio, the broadcast, they also had this small session that was produced by students, and how these sessions, they arrived also had a bigger impact on how it arrived to the liberated zone when one is listening to the PAIGC liberation radio broadcast. And these are seeing like the content of the materials and the methodologies that were used, that it was not just, even if it was just made for one group, it was easily appropriated by others by the emergency of the struggle. Trying to answer the third question, how popular education, and to think about militant education approach today, am I correct?
Yes, in terms of what is the relevance of militant education in the contemporary, given that the goalposts have shifted?
Well, I think it was Anela who mentioned that to think about the context today. And I think his point is valid, as it's not just the struggle against colonialism. We have several other struggles on the way. And the inspiration that I think we can take from the PAIGC is to see how did they first to see that this practice is possible. The practice of putting popular education available, the popular of creating materials, the process of bringing that to the world today. But for that, and I think it was, let me just check here my notes. It was Blaise who mentioned to pay attention to our conditions today. What are the conditions that we have? What are the struggles that we have? And then see what was made before. Of course, we can bring militant education today, but we have to adapt it to the struggles that we are facing today, but also not forgetting the struggles that happened in the past.
Thank you, Sonia. I don't know, between Anela and Blaise, Anela, do you want to share some thoughts on those questions, if any, either of you? There is one more question that popped up that looks quite cool to ask. So I want to ask that just after, but do you have any immediate comments? No, okay, then I'll ask this last question and maybe we can round up after. Somebody, Imani Naumojas from Guinea-Bissau says, thank you, Sonia. Could you elaborate on the PAIGC, how they used positive discrimination in the internatos, where boys who had the best grades at grade 5 would be getting a scholarship to the pilot school, whilst girls get the same scholarship at the 3rd grade. And also that at the pilot school, both boys and girls would do the same work, such as cooking, fetching water, and sewing. So I think they just want to know a little bit about the kind of gender equality, how they dealt with that.
Okay. I think I can answer the second part of the of the question, as I don't have, or I didn't came across of any information about the first one, about the boys who get the best grades on the 5th grade, just go to the pilot school in Conakry, and the girls on the 3rd level. I have no information. I could not find documentation on this matter, so I cannot answer this question. But I can answer the part of the gender equality, because at the pilot school, from several testimonies, boys and girls will have the same tasks, and in this study we have a image of the scale of services, what was to be done in the boarding school, in this case in the liberated zones, where one could see what were the tasks. And what PAIGC had, it had like the service groups, which were mixed groups, that was in charge of coordinating these tasks were made at the end of the day. So there was no difference in pilot school. Of course, there were conflicts, because one is coming from one culture, from different backgrounds, and of course there's conflict, but there was a priority in the PAIGC of not making this difference in the classroom, in the school, but also throughout the struggle. And to give, I wanted to give one example, and it completely vanished now from from my head. Let me see if I can pick it up again. Yes, one can see this one example of this by the film The Mangrove School, where you have one of the students of the pilot school mentioning the fact that that boys and girls, they had the same tasks at school. And I think this was a way of balancing gender equality, but there was another aspect of how does one convince other cultures in Guinea-Bissau, or other practices in Guinea-Bissau, of letting girls coming to school, of parents allowing girls coming to school. One of the strategies, and actually it was a story that happened with Ghana, when students, a group of girls went to Ghana to study medicine or nursery. And when they came back, parents saw their children like already formed and doing the practice of it. And then there was insight of other parents to send their girls also to Ghana to continue to pursuing the studies of nurse, to become a nurse. And then one can see other practice that the PAIGC was doing in order for women to participate or be active in the process of attending school and be part of it, not in a differential position, but in the same, in an equal position.
Thank you so much, Sonia. I don't know if we have any comments from last comments from Anela and Blaise. Otherwise, I'll be happy to conclude. But if you have any last comments, then please do. Maybe let's go Blaise, Anela, and Sonia, if you have any last words.
I would just want to make a little comment on this gender inequality thing that appeared. Carmen was very instrumental in the struggle for national liberation. And I think she was the one that said that they were fighting two forms of oppression, which is colonial and then against patriarchy. So I should think that Carmen played a very key role in pushing, the gender inequality. And it keeps coming up even today in our political education platforms. You are putting mechanisms, because there must be this, and Iman was right, positive discrimination. If there's a historic exploitation and oppression of women, we cannot provide equal platforms within our space that addresses this historic inequality. So I think it's an important dimension that we should pay attention to in the process of political education. Thank you very much. I'm grateful for the platform, really grateful.
Thank you, Blaise. Anila?
Thank you so much, Mika. I think here one would start just thanking for the making available this platform to share our experiences as popular educators in the process of involved in education for liberation. And I think one thing that we take very close to heart is the fact and the importance of consistency in the work that we do continuously, and continuously constructing knowledge and decolonized knowledge at that point, to mention, is one of the most important things that will keep us in the correct path of struggle. And I think that this material is one that educators can take as a mirror to continuously reflect on their practices if they best fit the conjuncture and context that they are currently working, mobilizing, agitating, and educating in.
Thanks, Adela. Final words from Sonia?
Final words. Well, apart from the thank you so much for making this study now available in different languages. Thank you so much for the questions and for the presence of everyone who's joining this discussion. And I think one of the last comments that I would like to do is, like, we can use definitely the PAIGC study as an inspiration, because it was a practice that happened. But to bring it today is important to know the realities where you want to implant in order to develop then the instruments and the materials to make it happen today. But definitely the PAIGC was a huge inspiration. There is many other aspects of the struggle to study, to continue to study. Education was one of them, but there is many others that I think is important to pay attention to, that all combined will give us a broader image of the liberation struggle. That is not just the military, the military one, the starvation one, and so on. But to go to other areas, to research or to know more about how PAIGC developed their practice in other areas. Let's think about the courts. Let's think about health. All combined, they'll give us a much broader view of what entails a liberation struggle and how we can imagine the future based on that.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sonia. Thank you, Anil and Blaise. Thank you all of those who joined us and gave us those thoughtful questions, as well as the team that you don't necessarily see who helped with the coordination technically, as well as producing this wonderful text. And Sonia is just reiterating the mandate that we have both in Pan-Africanism Today and Tricontinental, that we need to continue to unearth many of these historical reference points, as well as delve deeper into the ones we already have, such as looking at, as you said, healthcare and other sections of the liberation struggle. So hopefully we will be expanding. This is part of a series of studies on national liberation coming out of Tricontinental. And so hopefully in the near future, we will have further studies that also bring together a broader context of our continent of over 2 billion people as we continue to struggle in our day-to-day campaigns and education processes. So on that, thank you, everyone. And I think we can sign off for today. Until next time. I think we are off live now on these platforms.
Should I log out? Or should I?
Oh, okay. No, I think
I'm ending the meeting now.